Good day and welcome to an emergency Ransfus update on the South African budget speech. Normally, one of these updates would basically be about what the minister announced and changes taxation, etc. Unfortunately, we didn't have a budget speech because it was postponed. Why was it postponed? Because the GNU, the Government of National Unity, couldn't come into an agreement about particularly a VAT increase of about 2% from 15% to 17%. In this little broad update, I'm going to tell you why we needed to do this VAT increase, why it's problematic, and what the prospects are going forward. So why did we need to do the VAT increase? Because we are beyond probably what is a sustainable level of debt to GDP for a country like South Africa. For a country like South Africa, I think the benchmark is about 75% debt to GDP in terms of a ratio. We are about 76%, and the trend line has been going in one direction, higher over the last several years. This results in a problem. Why? Because a country like South Africa that basically has a weak credit rating, we pay more interest for our debt than a place like Japan does. So Japan has a 200+% debt to GDP ratio, but they are considered to be a better risk profile than South Africa, so they pay less interest per unit of debt. We have a high interest payment that we have to put for our debt, meaning that even though our debt ratio is much lower than places like the US or much of Europe or I guess in Japan, the amount we spend is not. And therefore, if we basically continue this pathway, we will get to a point where we'd be spending much more on interest payments, servicing the debt, than we would be spending on things like education and healthcare and all those other things that are very important to a country like South Africa. And that is a debt spiral for a country like South Africa. So we have to do something about this debt. What can we do? We can cut spending, we can increase revenue. Spending in South Africa is driven by two main things. One is government salaries for government workers. The other one is basically welfare payments, grants. South Africa's civil servants are some of the best paid versus the private sector of anywhere in the world, but their power is quite strong. It's unlikely this government has the ability to go and actually really get severe concessions from these civil servants regarding wage increases. So that's pretty much a difficult thing in this kind of environment. South Africa also has one of, if not the biggest, ratios of people receiving welfare to people paying net into the fiscal system. We've got about 1 million+ people in this country that are paying the vast majority of money into the system. About 1,000+ companies that pay the majority of the corporate tax in the country, and we have over 20 million people collecting money from the government. That's not a ratio that's sustainable going forward. But in a democracy, those 20 million people, they all have votes, or majority have votes. The children, of course, don't, but a lot of the 3 million people do have votes, and those votes basically swamp out the million or so net taxpayers that we have in this country. And so democracy finds it very difficult to cut welfare payments once they've basically been accepted. They become entitlements. They become things that people believe that they're entitled to, and trying to cut back on that results in significant pain at the ballot box. And so that's also politically unfeasible. Then what can we do to basically raise more revenue for the government? Well, it's to get some kind of taxes going on. What taxes options are there? There's three big things you can basically run tax. You can tax income, you can have corporate taxes, you can have VAT. Income tax in South Africa, the marginal tax rate for the highest income earners is 45% already. This is approaching the level that most people say is unsustainable. Once you get about 50%, towards marginal tax rates, people start behaving very funny. They start, looking more at cutting tax exposure as opposed to trying to earn income, which is not something the government wants to be doing, especially in a country like South Africa that's not growing fast enough. The other thing is corporate taxes. Like I mentioned, 1,000 so companies, which is the majority of corporate taxes in the country. Those companies have a couple of options. Firstly, they're not tied to South Africa. You can always, as a company, especially a multinational, if you wanted to, divert where you earn income. You can put it in other parts of the world. And, Apple, for instance, puts a lot of its income through Ireland because the tax rate there is lower, and therefore it gets a lower overall tax rate because it just records a lot of income in Ireland. Companies also are very, flighty in terms of the ability to move if they needed to. And finally, that tax is also very, variable because, if the company doesn't make a profit, even though it's like, a very large company, it's basically will pay no taxes. Whereas income, no matter what your expenses are, whatever income is in, you basically have to pay a percentage of that as taxes. Companies basically, the revenue they earn is, swamped out by the amount of money they got to basically spend the expenses, and they make a loss the year, they pay no taxes. Okay, so those are the options that you had, and those options are not viable. Then it comes to VAT. Now VAT, value-added tax, easy to basically put into place. Very painful because it tends to basically go after the poorer people more than the wealthy people for a simple reason. The poor have to spend almost all their income just to survive. The wealthy are able to spend a portion of the income to survive and put a lot of their income basically into other things, savings, towards investments, etc. They have ways around paying VAT. So this is aggressive tax. There are exemptions that basically reduce some of this aggressiveness, but VAT is an aggressive tax. And unfortunately, this is the path we have to go forward if we want to do anything about that. Debt to GDP ratio, or basically try and make a dent in our debt and try and maybe bring that down over time. We have to go and try and attack that. The other option, of course, is to grow very, very fast, but that is in South Africa at least under control of the government, it seems to be. Now, what is the forecast from here? Now, we weren't expecting this particular postponement, but now that it's occurred, we can't, for instance, trust that we will definitely get a resolution regards to this impasse between the different members of the GNU. It could very well be that this is the thing that breaks the GNU. We've really seen the GNU come under pressure, for instance, with regards to the Bella Bill, the Basic Education Bill, as well as the National Health Insurance. Both things that the DA basically is very strongly opposed to, but the ANC wants to push through. And I think if you add more and more pressure to the allowance, it's not out of the realm of possibility that we don't ever have an agreement, and therefore the government collapses, in inverted commas, and the new alliance perhaps with other parties than the DA basically is created with the ANC, and that will be the new government. And to tell you the truth, if that does occur, the market will react very negatively. The market has given the ANC a huge amount of leeway just because they're in partnership with the DA at the moment. They definitely view the DA as the best party for the market. And if we do see them get kicked out of government because of this impasse, that's not going to be great for the rand and for the stock market as well. If we do look forward, what are the prospects? The best prospect is we have an agreement being made. And in addition to basically having VAT being increased, we basically have things like, for instance, the infrastructure spending get done really well, economic growth in the country pick up, and therefore that eventually becomes a way for us to reduce tax collection going forward because we make enough from the revenue we create. That's a very unlikely scenario. The next scenario is the bad scenario. In this scenario, we do have a breakup of the GNU. We don't have an agreement around VAT. We have other members of other political parties, team with the ANC, the MK, and the EFF, for instance, and the market will react, I think, quite negatively to that. Then the most common path, the middle way, I think is what's going to happen. There will be some kind of agreement between the DA and the ANC, but it'll be more of a short-term agreement, not a long-term sustainable one. That is going to translate into weakish economic growth in the country. And so even though we might avoid the crisis in the short term, in the longer term, this is definitely going to be a problem that's going to return, where our debt to GDP ratio is unsustainable, and we are basically unwilling to do the kind of really painful things that are required to basically bring that under control. That's it for this little update. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking again soon about our normal programming. We will talk about things like AI, etc. Thanks for joining me. Cheers.